"You showed me yours," she said. "I've been trying to work out how to show you mine." "Yours? I have a year too," she said. "You wrote yours down." My Playful Wife, Episode 23, After the Wedding, written by Mia. After the wedding, there was a particular quiet. Not sadness. Nothing remotely like sadness. More the specific texture of the aftermath of large things, the return to ordinary scale, the city re-emerging around you as you come down off the peak, the flat resuming its modest two-person proportions after days of being one cell in an enormous organism of family. A wedding gathers 100 lives into a single roaring point and holds them there for 3 days, and then it lets them go, and they scatter back to their 100 ordinary orbits, and the scattering leaves a hush. We came home into that hush. Saloni slept on the flight back. She slept the way she sleeps after she has spent everything, completely, instantly, her head finding my shoulder before the plane had finished climbing, gone before the seatbelt sign went off. I did not sleep. I watched the clouds, the white floor of them under the wing, and I thought, the way you think on planes at that altitude where your ordinary life looks small enough to see whole. I thought about the fire and my brother's face, and the turban my hands had tied, and the gold silk, and Mira on the dark lawn telling me I was the other thing, not the thing I'd feared. I thought about the year as a shape now nearly complete, an arc I could almost see the whole of from up here, the way you can only ever see a mountain's shape once you are off it and some distance away. At home, unpacking, she took the gold silk out of the case and held it up, worn once, folded now, the creases of the folding already in it, and looked at it with the particular expression she reserves for fabric that has been through something. "What do you do," she said, not quite to me, "with a thing that's been part of an occasion?" "You keep it," I said. "You don't wear it again because it already did what it needed to do. It used itself up being exactly right for one day. Wearing it again would be asking it to be ordinary, and it isn't ordinary anymore. So you keep it folded, and you take it out sometimes and look at it and remember the day, and that's its whole job now. To be looked at and to make you remember." She turned and looked at me over the gold silk. "When did you become someone who understood this?" she said. There was wonder in it, and something tender under the wonder. "You." The man who 3 years ago would have asked why I own more than 4 shirts. "When did you become a person who knows what you do with a thing that's been part of an occasion?" "Recently," I said. She folded the silk the rest of the way, the practice fold, and set it on the high shelf with the other kept things, and she smiled to herself, and went on unpacking. But she had heard the whole answer inside the one word. Recently. This year. This is who the year made. A man who knows what to keep and how, and why, and what keeping is for. In January, a new year. I had been writing in the notebook for 9 months by then, and it was almost full. The pages thinning toward the back cover, the way a thing announces its own ending before you are ready for it. I looked at it one morning at the kitchen table and thought about everything it contained. The whole arc, from the October kitchen to the December fire. Every room I had walked into that year, and the different man I had been in each of them. The balcony with the watering can. The bathroom drum in the dark. The plastic stool. The framework I had built when no one would give me the instructions. The gym and Samir's silences. The slow relearning of my own wife. All of it, in 9 months of handwriting, the record of a man becoming someone. And I thought about 2 things people had said to me. I thought about Mira in our kitchen in October, more than a year before, telling me about paying attention. Don't stop paying attention. That's the whole of what I know. No, that was Kaveri. Kaveri had said that, over a coffee on a Sunday. Mira had said the other thing, the thing about the parts that are only yours to carry. They had both, in their different ways, been telling me the same thing, that a marriage is what you choose to do with what you see, and what you choose to hold, and what you choose to let be held. And I thought about Saloni months before, in the monsoon, asking if she could read the notebook someday, and me saying someday, not yet. The last closed room, the one even our remarkable honesty had left shut. I had told her there was a room I hadn't let her into, the plastic stool nights, the worst of what I had thought in the pit of the year, the things a person thinks down there that he is ashamed of after. I had said I would let her in eventually, because a marriage should have no permanently locked rooms, in the end. Just not yet. I sat at the kitchen table with the nearly full notebook in my hands and understood that it was no longer not yet, that the wedding had closed something, that the new year had opened something, that the someday she had asked for and I had promised had quietly arrived while I wasn't watching for it, the way the important arrivals always do. She was at the other end of the table, working, her own sketchbook open. I got up. I carried the notebook around the table to her. I put it down in front of her, on top of her work, which I would never ordinarily do, and the wrongness of putting it on top of her work was how she understood that this was not a small thing. She looked at the notebook, then at me. "Now," she said. "Now," I said. She picked it up carefully, the way she picks up good fabric, with both hands, knowing there is something inside that requires handling correctly. She did not open it immediately. She held it and looked at me for a moment longer, checking, making sure, and I nodded, and she opened it to the first page and began to read. She read it slowly, over almost 2 hours, and I did not watch her face. This was the hardest thing, not the giving but the not watching. Every instinct said to watch, to read her reading, to track each page across her features and brace for the bad ones, the plastic stool pages, the pages where I had written the things I was ashamed of. But watching would have been a way of standing over her while she read, of making my own anxiety into a pressure on her, and she had given me, all year, the gift of the unwatched moment, and I owed her the same now, more than ever now.
So, I made chai.
I cleaned the kitchen, slowly, thoroughly, every surface, a man finding things to do with his hands. I went out to the balcony for a while and looked at the January city, cold and clear. I came back in. She was still reading. I could hear, sometimes, the turn of a page and once a long stillness on what I knew, from the place in the notebook, was one of the worst stretches, and I made myself stay at the sink with my back to her and let her be alone with the worst of me, which she had asked to see, and which I had finally let her. When she was done, she sat with the notebook closed in her hands. I came and sat across from her. I waited. The kitchen was very quiet. "You wrote all of this," she said, finally. "Yes." "About all of it. From the beginning. The kitchen, the everything." She looked down at the closed book. "The parts where you hated me, you wrote those too. You didn't take them out. You didn't protect yourself, or me, or... you just wrote it. All of it. The true thing. Even when the true thing was ugly." "No," I said. "I didn't protect anything. That was the whole point of it. It's the one place I told the entire truth. If I'd protected myself, it would have been worthless. It would have been just another careful thing, and I'd had enough of careful things." She was quiet for a long time. I sat across from her and let her be quiet. I had learned this year the enormous difference between a silence you fill and a silence you keep, and this was a silence to keep, the most important one I would ever keep. "This is the bravest thing you've ever done," she said at last. "The notebook," I said. "Or the year." She looked up at me. Her eyes were full, brimming. Though she did not cry, she does not cry easily, my wife. The feeling has nowhere to exit through that particular channel. "Yes," she said. Just that.
Yes.
The answer to a question I had offered as either-or, and she had refused the either-or and taken both, the way she had taken both at the show when I asked if the name meant her or me. The notebook and the year. The writing of it and the living of it. Both were the bravest thing. Both were the same thing. I reached across the table and covered her hands with mine, the notebook between them. Under both our hands, the whole year, written down, held now by 4 hands instead of 2. "There are no more locked rooms," I said. "That was the last one."
You've been in all of them now.
"There's nothing left I haven't shown you." "I know," she said. She turned her hands over under mine, so we were palm to palm with the book beneath. I felt it, reading it. I kept waiting for the place where you held something back, the way I would have, the way everyone does, and it never came. You just kept opening doors, room after room, right to the back of the house. She pressed my hands. Nobody's ever shown me the back of the house before. People show you the front rooms, the good furniture. You showed me the whole house, including the parts you were ashamed of, especially those. Her voice was very steady and very full. Do you understand what that is? To be shown the whole house? It's the thing everyone wants and almost no one ever gets. And you just handed it to me on a Tuesday in January, on top of my sketchbook. We sat there a long time, palm to palm, the notebook between us, the January light moving slowly across the kitchen table, the back of the house finally open, every room of it, the light on in all of them. For a few days after she read it, something was different between us, and I could not at first tell whether the difference was good. She was quieter. She watched me more. I would look up and find her looking, with an expression I couldn't read, the look of a person revising a thing they thought they'd finished. I began to worry, in the old way, the way I'd thought I had retired, that I had made a mistake, that showing her the back of the house had shown her something she could not unsee, that the worst pages, the plastic stool pages, the pages where I had hated her with a completeness that frightened me even to record, had done a damage the rest of the notebook could not undo. On the 4th evening, she told me what the quiet was. We were on the balcony. She had been turning her cup in her hands for a while, the way she does before a hard thing, and then she set it down. "You showed me yours," she said. "I've been trying to work out how to show you mine." "Yours?" "I have a year too," she said. "You wrote yours down. I never wrote mine. I made it into cloth instead, into the collections, but cloth doesn't say the words. It only holds the colors. There are words I never said. From my side, you think you were the only one in a pit that year. You weren't. I had my own. You just never saw it because I'm better at hiding mine than you ever were at hiding yours, and because you were so deep in your own you didn't have the attention to spare.
I don't blame you for that, but you should know it existed.
It's only fair. You opened your whole house. I've been standing in front of mine with the key." And then she told me. She told me the inside of the year from where she had stood, which was not where I had imagined her standing. I had built, in my mind, a version of her from that time, composed, contained, the one who held large feelings without spilling, moving through the wreckage with her terrible grace. That version was real, but it was the front of her house. Behind it, she told me now, had been something I had never suspected, a guilt so total it had nearly unmade her, Nights she had lain awake certain she had destroyed the one genuinely good man she had ever been given, a self-hatred she had hidden precisely because she felt she had forfeited the right to be comforted for it. "How could I come to you for comfort," she said, "when I was the thing you needed comforting from?"
There was no one I was allowed to fall apart to.
"You were grieving, and it was my doing. I couldn't add my grief to yours. You'd have had to carry both. So I carried mine alone in the workroom, at night, into the cloth. You think you suffered in secret on a plastic stool. I suffered in secret 6 feet away, making blouses, hating myself, performing being fine so that you'd have one person in the house who seemed solid. We were both in pits that year, back to back. Neither of us knowing the other was down there too. I sat with that. It rearranged the year, not its facts, but its weather, the distribution of its suffering. I had spent 18 months half believing I had been the one who bore it, the wronged party doing the heroic work of staying. And here she was, telling me that 6 feet away, the whole time, another person had borne a thing just as heavy and far more lonely, because at least my pain had been the kind the world calls legitimate, and hers had not. She had carried guilt with no right to be consoled for it, which is the loneliest cargo there is. "Why, tell me now," I said. Not a challenge. I wanted to understand the timing. "Because you showed me yours," she said. "A thing like that can't be one-sided. You can't open your whole house to someone and keep a room locked yourself. It turns the opening into a debt, and I won't have you in debt for the bravest thing you ever did. So," she spread her hands, a small gesture. "Here it is. Now we're even. Now we've both shown each other the back of the house. Now there's nothing either of us is carrying alone that the other doesn't know about." I reached over and took her hand. "I wish you'd told me then," I said. "We could have been in the pit together, instead of back to back." "We weren't ready then," she said. "We didn't have the language yet. We built it over the year. You can't say the deepest thing until you've built the words for it, and we hadn't then. We have now. Maybe that's what the year was for. Building the words. So that eventually on a balcony, we could say the things that needed words we didn't used to have." "Any more locked rooms?" I asked. "On your side?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "That was the last one. The guilt was the thing I couldn't say. It felt like the one thing I didn't deserve to set down. Now I've set it down. No more locked rooms. On either side." She looked at me. "Do you know how rare that is? Most marriages run 50 years on a dozen locked rooms each, whole wings sealed off, and they call it peace, and it's really just never having dug the tunnel. We dug the tunnel. It nearly killed us, but we dug it." I thought of Kaveri, whose marriage had died not of any dramatic thing but of inattention, of two people who stopped digging toward each other and let the rooms seal one by one until nothing was connected anymore, just two people in adjacent sealed wings calling the silence comfort. We had done the opposite. We had been forced, by the worst thing, to dig, and the digging had connected every room. "I'm glad we dug it," I said, "even though it nearly killed us, especially because it nearly killed us. The things that don't cost anything don't connect anything. You only get the tunnel by paying for the tunnel." She leaned into me, and we stayed out on the balcony until it was late, two people with no locked rooms left between them, which is either the most frightening thing in a marriage or the safest, and which had become, for us after everything, the same thing. To be continued in episode 24, What Comes After.
Simbolo di copyright mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 23 of My Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
I've Mia.
Thank you for listening.